Trump Through the Looking Glass, Lessons from History. This is Mark Millardi, and this is Unprecedented. I have to say that in my 55 years and running on this planet, I'd never before been concerned about our nation, our way of life until now. And again, the reason I'm now sitting at the mic is the fact that I truly believe we are facing an unprecedented threat to our nation, to our republic, to our democracy, to our way of life. As I've mentioned before, I have a love of history and I'm fortunate to have an amazing memory. I remember pretty much everything I see or hear. So it's been a God-given gift. And as a result, when I've read about history, I've retained a great deal of what I've read. And the beauty of that is I feel now at my age, 55, I'm able to bring to bear a lot of context around everything I see and hear, thereby being able to interpret current events through the lens of history. Now, one of the things I've learned by the study of history is that there are a series of things that are very characteristic of repressive political systems, repressive regimes. And all throughout history, this has been true. There's a series of things that a quote unquote repressive regime does in an effort to control the population. First and foremost, virtually every repressive regime you can cite throughout history, and I feel we have one in power right now, has had a central authoritarian figure, generally a he, generally a man, almost without exception, somebody who was charismatic, somebody who had the ability to charm people, somebody that had the ability to, almost somebody that has a gravitational pull for everyone around them. An individual who is able to, rally the troops, if you will. So A is that central authoritarian figure. B is control over the media, and specifically the desire on the part of the regime to control the message, to manage the message, to fashion the message in such a way that it supports fully their aims, their ambitions, and in doing so, the only way they could typically go about that is either to bar the media from reporting upon what they're doing, to suppress the free press, to try to abolish the free press. In some societies, they put reporters in jail. In some societies, they've killed reporters. They've gone to varying degrees, if you will, of control. But control of the media is the second mechanism by which these repressive regimes exert their influence. The third aspect is demonizing certain segments of the population. Again, throughout history, regimes who have come into power who want to suppress and to impress a certain point of view on the population typically found a scapegoat. They would take a segment of the population. Often it was immigrants. Often it was people of different socioeconomic groups, people of different religions, people of different ideologies, and they would demonize them. And they would use that demonization as a rallying point around which to bring the bulk of the population together against that one minority group. So that is a third thing, again, that is characteristic of repressive regimes. Another one is extreme nationalism, flag waving to the extreme, saber rattling, as they used to say, to the extreme, even to the point of isolationism. We will close our borders. We will build walls around our nation. We will keep people out. America for Americans, if you will. That, again, has been a very distinct characteristic of repressive regimes throughout history. Another has been essentially self-aggrandizement. The regime essentially doing things to feather its own nest, to economically build up their own private wealth at the expense of the citizenry. So again, self-aggrandizement, very characteristic of repressive regimes. Another is the regime creating distractions, feints, in essence, distracting the population from what really matters and throwing them off course with blinders, if you will, all with the mindset of distracting from the criminal activities, the corruption of those regimes, the repressive policies of those regimes. etc. And last but not least, also characteristic of repressive regimes is the perpetuation of myth, of lies. It's being very loose with the truth. It's telling a lie often enough and through as many means and as many media as possible, where the lie starts to seep into the national consciousness in such a way that people start to take it as truth. This was true of Soviet Union, the old USSR. Lenin himself, the founder of communism, Marx and Lenin, they ascribed to that philosophy. Tell the people what you want them to hear, tell them repeatedly, and even if it's a lie and I tell it often enough, eventually it becomes the truth. Looking at those 6 or 7 characteristics of repressive regimes, I genuinely feel that if you went item by item by item down that listing, you're seeing a blueprint largely for what we're experiencing with the current Republican Party, the current GOP, and specifically as manifested in the Trump administration. They're suppressing the press. They are demonizing immigrants. They're demonizing other religions. They're following this blueprint almost to a T. Very dangerous precedent, therefore, being set. And again, the reason I'm sitting at this mic, the reason I'm attempting to, impart this wisdom and share my point of view is very much based on me, literally, for the first time in my political life, being concerned about our nation, being concerned about our freedoms, being concerned about our direction in a very existential way. Now, when you look specifically at where we're at, and I reflect back historically, John Adams, the second president of the United States and a very well-known founding father, John Adams was not a big fan of the two-party system. John Adams was actually quoted as saying, "There is nothing I dread so much as a division of the republic into 2 great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This is my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." Again, this was founding father John Adams stating that he believed ultimately the two-party system would lead us down a very bad path. And I have to say, looking at the 2016 presidential election, looking at the choices we were left with, and looking at who now is in office, Mr. Adams was quite prescient in terms of where he saw ultimately that two-party path leading us. Bottom line, in my estimation, here we're sitting now approximately 120 days into this new presidential administration. We have seen, in my estimation, dishonesty on an unparalleled level. We've seen not only a break with the truth, but largely an attempt to have an alternate truth, to present us with an alternate truth. The term alternative facts came into play several months ago. A very interesting way of saying we're going to lie, we're going to craft the story that we want to craft, and we're going to position it as a set of alternative facts for your consumption. That type of loose play with the truth, I believe, is one of the greatest dangers to our society, one of the greatest dangers to our democracy. The further we depart from the truth, the more frequently we depart from the truth, and the more we reinforce alternative facts, dishonesty, lies. It establishes a pattern that I believe chips away, eats away every day at our political system, our reason for being, our status as a nation, and frankly, our position in the world. Because ultimately, that hypocrisy, those lies that are perpetuated, people start to see them for what they are. Not only Americans, not only people on planet America, if you will, people around the world, our allies, people that matter to us around the world begin to see that, and they begin to lose faith in what the United States stands for. So it's exactly these type of issues that have led me to speak out. I tend to be a person who has a very positive outlook on things. I'm realistic about the challenges that I face, that my family faces, that my friends face, that we face as a nation. I'm very realistic about that. And I confront things head on, but I tend to look at things from a glass, half full perspective. Always have. Very optimistic in all those respects. And as a result, when I look at the current political manifesto that we're seeing coming out of the GOP, that we're seeing specifically coming out of Donald Trump and his regime, they're looking at things through the darkest possible, blackest possible lens. There's an impression that's being created that the world is indeed as dangerous as it's been at any point in history. Anyone and anything is out to kill us. Screw or be screwed, right? We better screw them before they screw us. Seems to be very much the operating philosophy of this current regime. I don't buy into that. Facts speak for themselves. Anybody who is willing to dig in and look at the facts will in fact see that we are living at the safest and most harmonious point in the history of the recorded world. There are less people literally on the planet right now in harm's way in warlike situations than there ever have been in the history of man. Just compare and contrast where we are right now in 2017 to where the world was at in 1944 during World War II. It appeared to be Armageddon. People weren't sure if the global structure would survive. Would democracy survive? Everything was on the table. Everything was in play. Literally, the rules were being rewritten. In 2017, we're nowhere close to that scenario. Nowhere close, which means the extremist positions that the government is pushing as a supposed antidote to this dark fatalistic worldview are unfounded, because the worldview isn't dark. It isn't fatalistic. We are truly living at the safest point in history. We're living longer. We have superior medical care. We have more people living under democracy, self-determination in the world right now than at any other point in the history of the world. So these are just a few reference points that go to make the point that the dark fatalistic worldview that's been perpetuated, it's a smokescreen. It's a way to control the population. It's a way to manipulate public opinion and to scare people into taking positions that they otherwise wouldn't be taking. It's scaring people into the thought of building a wall on our southern border, building the Great Wall between the United States and Mexico, one of our key trading partners in the world. It's scaring people into thinking that's actually necessary when it's not. It's not. It's scaring people into thinking that all Muslims should be prohibited from traveling to the United States, the famous failed Muslim travel ban. Those are the types of policies that are trying to be pushed upon us. And again, the rationale that's behind those is that it's dangerous, it's uncertain, they're going to kill us, don't let them in, America for Americans. That's isolationism. That's the definition of that term, isolationism. And again, anyone who reflects back on history will see that the policy of isolationism, walling yourself in as a nation, it has never worked. Throughout history, it hasn't worked. Most societies that have closed themselves off, take North Korea as an example, take China up until the world came a knocking and China opened the door. Those were North Korea now being the poster child. Or you take Cuba. These are societies that were extremely repressive, shut out the rest of the world, attempted to just leave, they wanted to be left to their own devices. And what do you have? You have starvation. You have abuse, unimaginable human rights abuses that occur. You have a society that ends up being held back from the scientific developments that the rest of the world is benefiting from, the medical and health benefits that the rest of the world is benefiting from. Those societies that close themselves off, they have none of that. They're set back indeterminately. And I'm going to leave this segment with this thought. When I look at this current political climate, and I look at the path that they're attempting to take us down, in my estimation, it's very much a path that says we want to return the U.S., we want to return America to the way America was in the perhaps 1950s, post-World War II. We want to revert back to an oil-based economy. We want to revert back to a time when women were marginalized. We want to revert back to a time when African Americans and other minority groups and ethnicities were completely marginalized. We're talking pre-civil rights era type of thinking. We're talking a time and a place when, frankly, and I'm a white guy from the Bronx, when America was white, and whiter. there seems to be this pushback, this reactionary sentiment that we want to take America back to that era. And there were good things about that era. There's no question about it. There were some profoundly bad things about that era. The civil rights movement hadn't yet occurred. The women's rights movements hadn't yet occurred. We were fairly backward at that point in time in our history. And reliance on fossil fuels and oil-based economy, the dependence on that is something we've made decades of progress moving away from. Why return us to that? So I'm going to leave this segment on the standpoint of we shouldn't turn back the clock. There is no need to turn back the clock. Science has moved on. Our society has progressed. We are in a materially better position than we were 70 years ago. There's no reason to turn the clock backwards. It's just not in the cards. It's not in anyone's best interest. That's my feeling. That's my belief. Hopefully, throughout this podcast series, I will be able in a factual way to lay out a breadcrumb trail that says, here's a better direction for us to move in, moving away from reactionary, repressive stances and moving towards inclusiveness, moving towards energy independence, moving towards a society that's advancing, that's moving forward, that's evolving. Again, stay with this podcast. As I mentioned before, we want to hear your feedback, good, bad, and different. Please check in with us and keep on viewing and let us know how you feel and if there's any specific issues you'd like us to address. This is Mark Millardi, and this is Unprecedented.